Hip hop is so much about digging into the history.
Hip hop till you drop.
Hip hop opens the door and the discovery for music that came before us.
He did it in such a way that spoke to us.
Hip hop is one of these amazing gifts that the Bronx has given the world. And what's beautiful about the gift is it's not one thing, but many things.
You see hip hop everywhere you go.
It includes struggle, but it also includes joy and celebration.
It felt powerful. There definitely was embracing their sexuality like we had never seen before.
It has found a way to keep the conversation going. It has found a way to bridge generations.
I'm D.M.C. and this is Meaning in Music.
1989. It was a flashpoint for racial tension in America. There was one song in particular that spoke to the moment and demanded to be heard.
Fight the power! Fight the power! Fight the power! We got to fight the powers that be!
They were all about creating this chaotic sound with a bunch of samples that really reflected the chaos that America was engulfed in at the time.
The message, the beat, Chuck D's rap, all of that captures a moment in time for people.
Fight the Power was a call to arms. It just ignited a fire in us.
It's that explosion. We're knocking, we're knocking, we're knocking. You're not listening. Bam!
I'm D.M.C. and this is Meaning in Music.
It's been listed as one of the best hip-hop songs of all time by Rolling Stone, and recently saw a surge during protests throughout the country this past summer. The lyrics and the sound were so powerful, it was even played on Serbian airwaves in 1991 as a rally cry against the oppressive Milosevic regime.
There's no question that Public Enemy's Fight the Power is the most potent protest song in hip-hop. And part of that had to do with the power and the imagery and the lyrics, but also the fact that it was really the soundtrack to Spike Lee's film, Do the Right Thing.
And then it's amplified by the energy that people give to the song, that it takes on a much larger symbolic role than might have been intended.
So what makes a song an anthem? Not just for a moment or even for a single generation, but one that crosses cultural lines and eras.
Hip-hop is the most verbose art form. What we can do with not only our words, but music being a medium that is like direct to the vein, you know, like dope, just in an emotional sense. It's effective and it's efficient.
When someone is rapping and saying words that you can feel assault you and penetrate you and challenge you, there is a different kind of reaction.
How important is that rallying cry, finding a refrain that the audience can chant and shout in protest moments that makes that song ripe for being kind of the anthem of a movement?
Call and response is so key to protest songs and to anthems, because that's what allows for audience participation, right? If it's just an artist on stage saying the lyrics to a song or saying the hook, it doesn't have the same power. When Kendrick Lamar is saying, we gonna be all right, you know, these are ways for the listener or the audience to participate and actually help create the energy of the song.
All's my life I has to fight. All's my life hard times like, yeah.
Just recognizing that that is a sample from The Color Purple.
All my life I had to fight.
The nostalgia is always something that just kind of takes things up a notch.
As soon as you hear, all's my life I had to fight, you remember how she felt when she said that. And so before the song is 2 seconds in and you already like, we've been at this protest all day. We've been talking about police terror all these years. All my life I had to fight.
Literally, that is symbolic of every Black person's experience in America.
It's the simplicity of the lyricism, right? We gonna be all right is speaking to the resilience of Black people. We always make a way out of no way. And this is just a way to remind us of that.
We gon' be all right. We gon' be all right. We gon' gon' be alright. We gon' be alright.
Music has long been a companion to movements. Often, songs unintentionally take on a new meaning to the masses. Aretha Franklin's Respect became an anthem for both civil rights and feminist movements. And Beyonce's Flawless tore through social media as young women used it to celebrate their beauty and identity, demonstrating that celebration can also be a form of protest.
I think songs like You Got Me by The Roots, Brown Skin Lady by Black Star, something that's baked into that is this notion of self-affirmation.
Let's see, you fruitful, beautiful, smart, lovable, huggable, doable like art, suitable to be part of my life. Copper tone, oh you copyright infringement. Hey, you been this 10 since way back in the day.
Even though a lot of that music was very specifically about Black affirmation, even as an Asian American, I could understand what that was getting at, and it gave me permission to feel that I could think good things about myself too.
Does help us as Black folks to center ourselves in Black joy, which is a really, really important part of our movement. It's what has sustained us through just years and years of trauma and oppression.
Some of the first songs created by Black folks in America were Negro spirituals. Songs with spiritually uplifting and politically subversive themes sung by enslaved African people.
It's really kind of the first level protest songs, so that they're not just rooted in Christianity or biblical texts. There are messages encoded in them to talk about freedom.
Way in the water, way in the water, way in the water.
These lyrics are a guide, signaling to enslaved people to go by the waterway where dogs couldn't pick up their scent and cross over into freedom. One of the pillars of hip hop is the piece about speaking to the struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How has hip hop been used in this particular way, and what is it about the art form that lends itself to that use?
I think hip hop illuminates the everyday, which I think it includes struggle, but it also includes joy and celebration and heartache and fighting and everything.
The reason hip hop is such a natural and potent vehicle for protest is partly because it was born out of injustice in 1970s Bronx, New York, where even after the Civil Rights Act was passed, Black and Latino areas were still experiencing poverty and severe inequities.
People are still disenfranchised, feel not empowered, their communities aren't changing, and they're left to fend for themselves. And as anything, and particularly with African American culture, you always make a way out of no way.
You saw very few examples of young Black and brown people having a voice, a place in American culture which was defined by them, for them. And that's what hip hop was about, transforming the American cultural landscape by bringing a new narrative, set of narratives to the table about life growing up Black or brown in America.
Talking about your block, or your zip code, or your area code is a common theme in hip hop. There's pride in where you're from, but it's also a way to blast out to the world what's going on in your hood.
One way of looking at hip hop is a very distinctive African-American expression, but it's always been a genre that borrows and is not afraid to experiment. And so those elements of being able to mix is kind of one of those abilities for hip hop to transcend and to percolate out.
That ingenuity and experimental spirit inherent in hip hop is why we see it flourishing all around the world, often in areas that face a similar oppression and a lack of resources.
So scarcity is an indigenous aesthetic because wastefulness is not an indigenous value.
And hip hop is all about
the cycle and reuse and recycling, yeah.
Native or indigenous communities have been victims of horrific traumas across the globe that still continue today. Indigenous rappers like Frank Wallen, Angel Hayes, and others have tapped into hip hop to tell the stories of their people.
What made hip hop so relatable, to us as natives was, the struggle. Like when back in the day when I heard Public Enemy, it was just like, yo, man, these guys are talking about us, They were going through their struggles with the inner cities, and so us on the reservation, like the inner city ghettos and reservation was similar. And so when they spoke about that struggle, man, we could relate really easy.
How has hip hop helped Native American musicians reframe what Native American identity looks like? And, and speaking candidly, you've got these regressive stereotypes like the stoic Native American, this archetype.
Whether it be Native North Americans or Papua New Guinea, in any indigenous society, we have, and it's this very unfortunate legacy from anthropology, framing them in a particular way. Embracing hip hop is a way of people to say, the stereotypes. I'm going to show you what I really am. You think you know, but you don't know.
Native American artists have found an ally in hip hop since its inception. And in 2016, it leveraged the art form to protect sacred land and water in one of the most historic stands against the US government in recent history, the Dakota Access Pipeline, or better known as #NoDapple.
It was a gathering of unity, of everybody, all races, all religions, all backgrounds. They were all coming together to fight for this element, this water, this clean water.
And I said, I want to create an anthem that speaks to indigenous people around the world. It was about uplifting, but also being proud of where you come from and keeping your head up and stand up for, for equal rights, stand up against the injustice, stand up against economic imperialism, stand up against that dapple.
They wanted me to rap in the Apsalagat language, my tribal language. And so I was like, yo, man, that's huge for me.
I was like, man, do it in your native tongue. Let's showcase the beauty of that and stay in Superman mode.
Ultimately, the Dakota Access Pipeline was built and shut down in 2020 pending environmental approval. But Native peoples and marginalized communities around the world continue to fight to be heard. For them, hip-hop is an open source platform, available to anyone from any background, used to wield activism as much as it's used for celebration.
This is a toolbox that you can use to tell your own story, right? And reconnect and bring something new, because it's like a formula that allows you to put infinite numbers into it and it always comes up with a different result.
Hip-hop was created to be accessible, expansive, and adaptable. And you don't need much more than a good beat and good lyrics to tell your story.
It's also the pulse of culture, you know what I'm saying? From the youth here to Liberia and South Africa and Thailand and Palestine. If the youth are always the base of any movement, then hip-hop is the perfect vehicle because that's what the youth are listening to.
It mushroomed into something big, it's dominated the commercial marketplace. But at its heart, it's about the people. It's about them speaking truth to power, commenting on the world around them, and finding some kind of agency in dealing with that.
If you've listened to iconic rap albums from the 80s and 90s, you've probably heard something familiar between them. Like this beat in LL Cool J's Mama Said Knock You Out. Now check out Run's House by Run D.M.C. And Dr. Dre's Let Me Ride. They all sampled one iconic drum beat, the sample that laid the foundation for well over 1,000 pop and hip-hop records. I'm D.M.C. Pongo, and this is Meaning in Music.
I love sampling. I just do. I love sampling music. That's like the backbone of hip hop.
If you've listened to a new song and thought, this sounds familiar, it's likely that the song you're listening to features a sample. This could be a beat, a hook, a vocal line, or even an entire melody taken from one song and used to inspire and create something new.
I grew up digging for samples and learned so much about music through my favorite hip-hop producer sampling.
Oh my God, I've sampled my whole career. I've sampled everybody from Tupac Shakur to Luther Vandross, Never Too Much, one of the greatest instrumentals ever created. And you know, we mashed it up with Rihanna's Kiss It Better, that's another sample.
Sampling, as we know it today, uses technology that came about in the 80s.
And when you get into the recorded era, to capture that same feel that was going on in the streets and that same essence, you know, we would use the technology, the drum machines and the samplers, the SB1200s, to take a little bit of that record, that 30 seconds, and extend that part so you can make it into a full 3-minute song. Sampling all starts from the park. So it starts with Kool Herc, it starts with taking those popular breaks.
The break, which inspired sampling, can be traced back to DJs in the mid-1970s Bronx.
DJs began playing just parts of records, often referred to as the breakdown. They would use 2 copies of the same record and just extend that one 15-second or 30-second break into one very long loop by using those 2 records. That was the foundation of hip-hop music.
To keep their sources secret, early DJs like Grandmaster Flash and Kool Herc even scratched the labels off their records. How long it takes for DJs to dig in the crate to find that perfect loop. Because it's usually an obscure point. It's like, yo, this is 5 minutes into a 7-minute song or something like that.
Yeah, that's like the genius of the producer's ear. It blows you away how much they're able to take that small piece of a record and make something incredible with it.
And there's one artist in particular that producers have sampled more than any other. Who's the most sampled artist of all time?
Is it James Brown?
I'm gonna go with James Brown.
Right on, right on.
There's no question that the most sampled artist of all time is James Brown. There was so much about his music and about his aesthetic that made it right for sampling.
Why James Brown? Did the word spread among artists that this is where the gold is? What was it?
Part of the answer probably requires you to go back to just James Brown. What made James Brown James Brown?
You know, even the way that he moved on stage, the way he was dressing, you know what I'm saying? Like, oftentimes James Brown wasn't the most melodic singer. He would just be,
It was a kind of an accident of history that producers began to use this one little piece of funky drummer that came, 3/4 or 4/5 of the way through the song.
So this is the beat we mentioned earlier. This 20-second drum break in James Brown's Funky Drummer has been sampled nearly 2,000 times. One of the most commonly used samples, not only in hip-hop, but in pop songs by the likes of Madonna, George Michael, and Sinead O'Connor. So what is it about this specific drum beat?
That particular patterning of the drum, rappers and MCs could build on. It created the perfect foundation, the perfect cadence for an artist to be able to spit a rhyme over.
Easy to find the pocket in that rhythm.
It allowed for that easy 4-bar structure of a rap. For the early hip-hop producers to identify that was brilliant.
And it was Clyde Stubblefield who played the indelible drum break that's lived on in so many hit songs.
I do believe all musicians borrow from another. We call it sampling now, but in music's history, we're always listening and borrowing and incorporating something that we've heard before and creating something new.
Locating the sample as a consumer, as a listener, became an art form unto itself. It really makes you go back into the annals of music archives and try to figure out, well, what else can I learn about these artists that were originally sampled? Soul, funk, and disco have long been popularly sampled genres among hip-hop producers. But it didn't start out simply as a creative choice. It's a combination of limited resources and ingenuity.
going back to the period of hip-hop's emergence in the 1970s, we're talking about a period when American cities, and in particular New York City, and you had young people who were not having music classes at school, whose access to music were through their parents' turntables and record collections. And the brilliance of early hip-hop DJs was really using that as the basis, the turntables and the records, for the creation of an entirely new cultural movement and musical form.
I can't think of another musical genre that took a turntable or a record player and started scratching, right? And made that noise, right? So in some ways you could argue hip hop in some sense is subversive, and it takes the script and flips it, and it's like, oh, we will show you what music is, right? You think you know what music is, we will show you.
Oh, yeah. You don't stop. And that party element, you got to see the people there in real time react to hearing these records flipped, and then hear an MC kill it live.
And that's where you had MCs for the first time spitting rhymes over the records and the breaks that the DJs were spinning. That's where you had the breakers breaking to the break beats that the DJs were playing. So these parties, which were happening in parks, in school auditoriums, and rec centers, that was the birthplace of hip hop.
And since then, hip hop culture has traveled from the Bronx, Paris, Japan, South Africa, and every other corner of the world, showing up through music, fashion, art, and dance.
Hip hop in many ways is like one of these amazing gifts that the Bronx has given the world, right? And what's beautiful about the gift is it's not one thing, but many things, right? So you can make it your own, and that making it your own, it just is anew once again.
I think that one of the main things that makes hip-hop something that can really catch on throughout the world and make people, no matter where they are, feel like it's something that they can claim and make their own is this idea of remixing that's always been in hip-hop culture.
The remix is a technique that emerged during the disco era and popularized by hip-hop producers. It differs from sampling in that it doesn't just pull one part of a song. A remix can remake an entire song by adding new vocals, layering or removing elements, or blending it with a different genre.
A remix is just a reimagining of an existing record that you already made.
Like Savage by Megan Thee Stallion.
I'm a savage.
Dope track, but once Beyonce got on it, it went viral and catapulted Megan Thee Stallion into superstar status. The remix can be a game changer.
Sometimes the remix can be better than the original sometimes. Like it can add to it, create a whole new element.
Some of these samples and remixes are so connected to the original.
And like sampling, the remix gives new life to a song and can also introduce entirely new sounds to audiences around the world.
When I was in college, there were a lot of these beats that were just sampling small snippets of like Bhangra, Bollywood, and Asian music samples like Jay-Z's Beware with Punjabi MC.
The original track was a Bhangra song by British musician Punjabi MC that goes like this. Then Jay-Z dropped his verses on it, and it sounded like this.
I think actually depending on where you were, it was either Punjabi MC featuring Jay-Z or Jay-Z featuring Punjabi MC.
Same song, just a little different. And now you have two languages and two different audiences connecting with the same record.
If you are a hip-hop fan somewhere in Southeast Asia with very limited resources and could never envision yourself going to Brooklyn, you listen to something like 99 Problems and you have a story of driving down a street
From the hood, stupid, what type of facts are those? If you grew up with in your Zapatos, you celebrate the minute you was having dope.
that might not exist in your country, being in a car that you might not have access to in your country, and having a confrontation with a cop.
So I pull over to the side of the road, I heard, son, do you know I'm stopping you for? Cause I'm young and I'm black and my hat's real low. Do I look like a mind reader, sir? I don't know.
That is super relatable to young folks all throughout the world.
Sampling and remixing are more than production techniques. They promote a cultural exchange that keeps history alive.
It has found a way to keep the conversation going. It has found a way to bridge generations. Because you think of it, if the music had evolved and there wasn't sampling, how do people rediscover or discover for themselves what existed before?
August 2020, the height of the pandemic and a historic presidential race. If there was another major event that dominated the news cycle.
I said certified free, 7 days a week, wet and gushy, make that pull-out game weak.
The single WAP was released and immediately hit the top of the Billboard 100. And the video boasted more than 26 million views in 24 hours.
I think what gets overlooked in the WAP conversation is the fact that WAP, it is a good song.
So with WAP, you have two female rappers who are dominating the genre.
Structurally, it takes a sample of a Baltimore club, like a classic Baltimore club song.
There's some hoes in this house, there's some hoes in this house.
And, you know, they rapped over it, they switched the beat up a little bit.
There's some hoes in this house, there's some hoes in this house.
Thinking about WAP and what those words stand for, just a woman, you know, saying those words, referring to her own vagina, right? And then also saying, well, this is how I want my vagina to have pleasure, right? Not using a metaphor.
It is a very feminine, female-led anthem, and hip hop is not that.
And just as soon as it dropped, rappers Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion became the target of fierce backlash.
Wet ass P-word. P-word is female genitalia.
This is not about diversity anymore, Tucker. It's about perversity.
No. I kind of felt like, well, where have you been? This is what they've been doing, so what is different about this?
But it's easy to just look at WAP and say, oh, we want to critique that because you're just looking on the surface.
They're talking about sex, but men have been doing that in hip hop for decades. When you have two black women do it, it's a problem.
So is this criticism of female MCs new? Or have we been here before? And if it's not new, then why are we still talking about it?
I'm Doma T. Pongo, and this is Meaning in Music.
Does hip hop have a misogyny issue? I think the answer is yes. I think it's a reflection of the world. I think the world has a misogyny issue.
The conversation around female rappers, their image, and whether their lyrics are empowering or reinforce misogyny goes back to the 80s and 90s with artists like Lil' Kim and Salt and Pepper. But before we go there, we can go back even further to understand the deep roots of policing black women's bodies.
How do we own some of the things that have been pushed upon us as an image? The over-sexualized woman, the vixen, all of these stereotypes that came out of minstrelsy and even existed beforehand that have been used to stereotype African-American women in many ways.
Minstrelsy was one of the first forms of popular entertainment, where white performers dressed in blackface, disseminating exaggerated and distorted depictions of African Americans, a legacy that has shaped the way we entertain to this day.
The perceptions of African Americans, the lazy, angry, jumping Jim Crow, the mammy, all those stereotypes shaped much of what we're dealing with today. It shaped magazine covers, sheet music, radio, recording, film, television, everything has that lens over it.
There are a lot of preconceived notions about black women that are rooted in US history. I think when it comes to black women specifically rapping about sex, I think that it's a double-edged sword because just the way that society is set up, we're unfortunately in a position where we rarely get to control that narrative. But I do think that there is some power to speaking to it and reclaiming the narrative.
So where's the line between reinforcing painful stereotypes or reclaiming agency over one's body, particularly for black women? Unsurprisingly, the answer isn't so straightforward, and it can change depending on the context.
Think about, the women like Ma Rainey and Gladys Bentley, who are, singing the blues mostly in the 1920s and the 1930s during the Harlem Renaissance.
In a way, these artists paved the way for female MCs today. Not only did they sing freely and explicitly about their sexual desires and experiences to huge audiences, but they often included same-sex themes.
That do they do that at that time? Where did they find that freedom? I mean, we know what history was like at that time for Black people. You know, what systems and structures did they have to fight against?
Lucille Bogan isn't widely known, but she's one of the iconic blues singers of this era, later covered by the likes of B.B. King. And her lyrics, well, let's just say they make WAP seem pretty chill. I love to play you a few lines, but it's still censored in 2021. You'll just have to Google it yourself to hear what we're talking about.
These women face real repercussions for the choices they were making. They were transgressing all types of gender norms and understandings of sexuality while they were doing that.
Like many who came after them, these blues singers used their music to bypass society's expectations, and in doing so, they grew quite a fan base. Still, they faced harassment and even imprisonment. A century later, the remnants of that suppression still exists through disproportionate criticism and attempts to control or undermine female MCs.
I believe that sometimes you gotta be a bitch to get to a certain point. This is a male-dominated field, and sometimes if you're not that bitch, you know, people will take advantage of you, and it's a bitch in a positive way, not a negative way of using
bitch is obviously a word that men often use in relation to strong women,
strong.
and it's seen as being a very derogatory term, but
Right.
you're reclaiming it, is that
right,
the idea?
Exactly.
Women have been an integral part of hip-hop's creation. Sylvia Robinson is known for her role in producing the first successful rap record, Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang and The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. While MC Lyte has been recognized as the first solo woman rapper to release a full-length album in 1988 at the age of 17.
I think right now, the message that I try to get across to females is not to be taken advantage of. Make your own money.
But since the beginning, hip-hop has been hyper-masculine and often misogynistic. This made it doubly hard for female MCs to carve out a space for themselves.
My impression of the male rappers today, speaking on the amount of respect that they give women or not, is pretty much on a scale from 1 to 10, 0.
Black men, and I would also say the white corporate execs, right, were dictating who and what in the content. These women wanted to articulate their versions of womanhood and sexuality within that very rigid context.
Early rappers produced hit after hit and received accolades, just like their male counterparts. But they still had to show a level of restraint in the way they dressed and how they spit.
MCs who were women, they had to look the part of being, you know, a little bit more masculine, a little bit more androgynous, because, you know, if they were too sexual, they wouldn't be taken seriously as rappers. And it took time for women to be able to wear what they want without being as criticized.
By the late 90s, we were seeing a golden era of female MCs, a neo-sexual revolution within hip-hop.
It felt powerful. I mean, just being able to see all of those females embracing themselves. It definitely was embracing their sexuality, you know, like we had never seen before.
I think Lil' Kim's emergence was a real indicator of a cultural shift in hip hop. Every prominent woman in rap that we see right now, they're pretty much a derivative of Lil' Kim.
I think it's just really, you know, it's a good thing that I can have influence on them, you know. However, there can only be one Kim. One Queen Bee. Sorry, guys.
You have women who are embracing sexuality, all the way up to people like Queen Latifah, who's rejecting that and thinking about kind of Afrocentricity. And so in that environment, we get a Lauryn Hill, who actually is a part of a group, right? Before she comes out with her solo album, where Lauryn is able to rap about a young Black woman's experience.
They were almost always attached to a crew that was helmed by a male rapper. So if you think Lil' Kim with Junior Mafia and Biggie, you think Foxy Brown with The Firm with Nas, you think Eve with Rough Riders. The list goes on. I think that speaks to the sort of limited entry points that women had at that particular time in hip hop.
Whatever.
But it also makes me think of someone like Missy Elliott, who was doing everything way back when. She was collaborating, but she was a solo entity.
You know, her style was a little bit more tomboyish. So I think when you hear a Missy song, yeah, it can be a little raunchy, but she doesn't necessarily look like what she's talking about. And I hear that a lot now in arguments. People are like, well, Missy was never like that. You know, she was never sexual. I was like, but you haven't listened to her songs then. Like, she had a song called 1 Minute Man. It was dirty.
What Missy did was break down the doors. Is like, I could present in any creative way I feel possible. You're not gonna trap me into this thing.
Some crazy stuff, y'all know how I do.
Even though there's a lot of criticism for rappers who are for hypersexual,
right?
Even those who are critiquing them aren't looking at the women who have chosen, who still celebrate Cardi and Megan, but have chosen to do music differently.
What does it take to actually engage with the works of women, right? Like Tierra Whack, Rhapsody, right? There has to be a long-term desire to continue listening. And what I find with people who are critiquing Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, they're gonna listen to WAP one time and discard it. But they're not willing to say, okay, but then let me listen to this whole catalog of Black women MCs and see what they have to say, because they don't want to invest the time. It's easy to say, oh, I hate this, and turn the channel.
There's no denying this moment in hip hop feels different than it did 10 or 20 years ago. Rather than a few mainstream female MCs, there are droves of different voices, dominating hip hop, commanding audiences, and topping the chart.
Yeah, I think that social media has been a great asset to help, female artists, because they can go directly to fans, and that, they don't have to always get everything approved by the label. You also can kind of control the way that you want to brand yourself.
Mainstream is very different now than it was 20 years ago, because now there are rappers who may not be on the cover of every single magazine, but they're super, super popular online, and that's perfectly fine for them.
Let them be artists. Let them revel in their sexuality. If they want to talk about politics or, stripping or getting money, or feel like that's the beauty in hip hop, is that they're able to express themselves freely and unapologetically.
I do think that we have a little ways to go, before we see a bit more like gender expansive people that are being highlighted, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
July 1986, Madison Square Garden. Run DMC is performing their now iconic single, My Adidas, to a packed house.
We like to start out this with diamond rings. My Adidas. Come on, put them up in the air.
It might seem weird that they're telling concert goers to raise their sneakers in the air, but it's actually a show of defiance to the critics of streetwear. Run DMC probably didn't know it at the time, but this will become a pivotal moment for the business of hip-hop and fashion.
I'm D.M.C. Pongo, and this is Meaning in Music.
My Adidas.
When Run DMC hit the scene in the early 1980s, they represented a new generation in hip hop. They came with a raw style, with the black leather jackets, the sunglasses.
You think about the early hip hop groups, Africa Bambaataa, Soul Sonic Force. A lot of it was about the pageantry. They looked like they came off the mothership. They looked like they came from outer space, And
then Run DMC looked like the street guys. The hustler with money, the leather jacket, the hat. From their sound to their look, we're like, hello, it's a new day.
An Adidas executive saw thousands of fans in the crowd waving their Adidas shoes in unison. It was soon after that Run DMC signed a $1 million deal with Adidas, the first major brand deal in hip-hop up until that point.
Word up, and we always rock our Adidas on our feet.
My Adidas really turned on the light bulb in the minds of shoe executives and fashion executives, seeing hip-hop as a potential partner, collaborator on marketing clothes and shoes.
Today, we know rappers and fashion go together like what Kanye said in his track Devil in a New Dress, one of his many odes to his favorite designers.
You'll hear Cardi B be talking about Balenciaga or Louboutin red bottoms on her biggest song to date that made her popular, Bodak Yellow.
expensive. These is red bottoms, these is bloody shoes. Hit the school, I can get them both. I don't wanna choose.
When you just talk about the power of rap, Biggie says on Hypnotize, I put
O's
holes
in
in
NY, on to DKNY. Miami, DC, prefer Versace. All Philly hoes know it's Moschino.
Every cutie with a booty bought a coochie. See, Big really did that for coochie, you know what I'm saying? He encapsulated coochie.
When I think about Jay and I think about, you know,
And I don't wear jerseys, I'm 30 plus. Give me
a fresh pair of jeans and a button up. We invested so much in our jerseys, and you just had to put them in the closet as soon as Jay said, I don't wear jerseys, I'm 30 plus. Like, he just shifted the whole thing.
According to the Wall Street Journal, Fendi, Balenciaga, and Gucci were called out 664 times in rap and R&B songs in 2018, up from 31 collective mentions in 2010.
What else do rappers rap about other than clothes?
Because of hip-hop's influence on mainstream culture and consumers, luxury brands clamored to collaborate with rappers. But that wasn't always the case.
I think what's interesting is when you look at fashion in general, historically, Black people were usually locked out of that realm, especially when it comes to high fashion.
Clothing labels, the designers tended to try to distance themselves from hip hop because it was so controversial and seen as less than.
Enter Dapper Dan's Boutique, opened in 1982 by designer Daniel Day, also known as Dapper Dan. It was open 24 hours, catering to rappers like Big Daddy Kane and LL Cool J.
I'm Dapper Dan from Dapper Dan's Boutique, East 125th Street in Harlem, and I'm the designer for the stars.
So when you go up in there, it was either rapper or hustler in there. It was no in-betweens. There was no middle class in there. These were thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.
So that's why you had really trendsetters like a Dapper Dan who was doing his own thing, unauthorized, but doing his own thing, drawing on the work of a Louis Vuitton or a Gucci, you know, with his store on 125th Street in Harlem.
We all love to be better and be bigger and have luxurious brands on us, but he did it in such a way that spoke to us with the sag, with the way we like to dress, and turned it into urban. He's a genius.
His Logomania designs became wildly popular, but he was soon shut down for violating copyright.
You start seeing the runway 20, 25 years later, and they got Dapper Dan designs on the runway.
It's just crazy to see how these luxury brands literally fought to put him out of business and then basically turned around and tried to sell his creations back to us.
They had to hire Dapper Dan. It's so crazy his position in Gucci now. They had to do the right thing because it was clear who's influencing their designs, and that all comes from hip hop, comes from the streets.
You cannot separate my fashion story from the hip hop story.
The contributions of designers of color and women like Misa Hilton and April Walker have often been overlooked, but their iconic styles have changed the face of fashion.
You see hip hop everywhere you go. All the way from the slums in Ghana to Johannesburg, being in Tokyo or being in South Korea. You know, they're rocking different iterations of hip hop fashion.
The fashion houses started recognizing how powerful hip hop was. If you look back at old Tommy Hilfiger fashion shows, you see Aaliyah, you see Destiny's Child, you see Naughty by Nature, mixing and mingling with high fashion models and representing these brands.
Streetwear, baggy clothes, sneakers, all styles associated with hip hop culture not only penetrated mainstream culture, it started driving it.
A lot of the luxury brands need rappers and need these musical artists to stay relevant and to reach this new generation.
Once artists start supporting these brands and talking about them in their music, hit records, you could forget it.
By most accounts, luxury fashion brands relate to hip-hop's global impact. Its influence on youth culture in places like South Korea and Japan began spreading rapidly in the early 80s through film.
When films like Beat Street and Breakin' and Wild Style start traveling around the world, you had young people hitting the movie theaters, seeing hip hop culture on the big screen, and literally not only going to see the movie multiple times, but the moment they're leaving the movie theater, trying to replicate the dance moves that they saw on the screen.
In Asia, the way that a lot of folks were being exposed to hip hop wasn't necessarily by embedding themselves with Black culture or in Black communities, but really getting it imported into their countries. One of the most vivid ways that I saw hip hop and Asian culture connecting was through the Wu-Tang Clan. When you look at that dynamic of Wu-Tang, it's not necessarily African Americans being in direct contact and cultural exchange with folks in China. It was very much by way of watching old kung fu flicks.
Hip-hop's love affair with Asian culture and aesthetic did eventually lead to a cultural exchange. And now, some of hip-hop's biggest fashion influences are from Asia. Still, the artists themselves reign supreme.
Just look at me. Hold on. Zoom back. No complaints.
So what's your most memorable moment tonight?
My outfit.
Kanye West shifted the perception of how a hip-hop artist dressed. The producer-rapper has collaborated with the likes of Louis Vuitton and Nike and launched multiple lines, most notably his Yeezy brand.
Pharrell had such a different style than what we had seen before. He was very much influenced by skate culture, and he was always wearing a bathing ape, and then he launched Billionaire Boys Club. And over the years, we've just really seen him like come into his own.
Pharrell and Kanye's contribution to hip hop and fashion is really interesting because we saw hip hop moving away from just streetwear.
Baggy clothes and sneaker culture have blown up around the world. But hip-hop fashion isn't limited to streetwear, and actually, never has been.
If you look back at the way male rappers used to dress in the 80s, the first rappers were wearing crop tops, almost high-heel boots, tight pants, leather pants, long hair. Even in the 90s, Busta Rhymes was wearing dresses. Andre 3000 was wearing wigs and dresses and makeup.
Though hip-hop is seen as a hyper-masculine genre, artists have always experimented with their style, and today we see more of them pushing gender norms, like A$AP Rocky, Young Thug, and Playboi Carti.
Playboi Carti wears a lot of really tight leather pants and big furry sweaters, and he poses in a way that you would not necessarily traditionally define as masculine or as a rapper would, but he dresses more like a rock star from the 70s. I think if you look deeper into hip hop and you look at all the subgenres, then you'll see the different ways in which people dress.
Hip-hop's journey with the fashion world started at the margins and is now firmly at the center, permeating nearly every trend we see today and making room for new faces in fashion.
Talking about fashion, what else? Talking about fashion.
The representation is increasing because the influence and the inspiration has long been there, but fashion is a very white industry.
A lot of these new Black designers are making a huge contribution by being where they are. Laquan Smith, what he does reminds me so much of what Misa Hilton was doing back in the day. He does a lot of monochromatic outfits, cat suits, fur, also Telfar Clemens, and his line is unisex. He is really revolutionizing the way that we look at fashion.
Some of these different brands have been reshaping the narrative that hip-hop and Black people are limited to streetwear, and it can't be high art.
They deserve to be seen and heard. I just hope to see them continue to have a seat at the table.
Montero Hill, also known as Lil Nas X, released Old Town Road on SoundCloud and began pushing it on social media. But the 19-year-old didn't anticipate it taking off the way it did.
So we walked out to Old Town Road by Lil Nas X to celebrate the fact that it has just broken the record for the longest running #1 hit on Billboard's Hot 100.
To me, I'm like, it's an undeniable country song.
But then when you get to those drums and the way those 808s hit and the way, like, that's hip hop.
I got the horses in the bag, horse stock is attached. Head is matted black, got the bushes black to match.
There's like a little bit of a twang in it, but then there's also a beat underneath it, so people didn't really know what to do with it in that way.
Artists are inherently complex. They want to experiment. They want to, push the boundaries of their voices, of their styles.
So, when do we call it hip hop? And when does it become something else entirely?
Where rap going is back to the street.
Hopefully it goes back to the street and don't get caught up in a bunch of commercial, politics. It's going to cross over and then you're going to see rap no more.
As artists continue to evolve their music, being defined by a genre is becoming irrelevant. Why are we still using these seemingly archaic categories? And what does that mean for the future of hip-hop music?
I'm D.M.C. Pongo, and this is Meaning in Music.
Even though there's a long history of hip-hop colliding with other genres, the music industry still has some trouble allowing certain artists to step out of their perceived boxes.
If you let Miley Cyrus and Post Malone oscillate between hip-hop and pop and rock and country, why can't Lil Nas X do the same thing?
When the song started jumping onto the charts, that's when things started to get tricky.
Soon, the song was removed from the country chart. Billboard citing that while it, quote, incorporates references to country and cowboy imagery, it does not embrace enough elements of today's country music to chart in its current version. This moment set off heated debates online.
You look at country artists who are 100% considered country artists, when they make a song that has a beat under it, no one is like, are you a rap artist? But if a rap artist makes a song that sounds like a country song and it has a beat, then everyone's like, ooh, we're not sure, we don't know.
It was like, clearly, you guys are racist, this institution is racist.
So he said, cool, I'm gonna get Billy Ray Cyrus, I'm gonna go get y'all country god, and he's gonna jump on this record with me, and now you're not gonna have no choice. Like, this thing is changing, so you can accept me on your charts or not, but when it goes down in the history books, people will remember this as a country song.
I just always felt like hip hop and country music was about storytelling. They're very heartfelt genres and they're attached to pain in a lot of the storytelling. So there's a lot of similarities between hip hop and country music to begin with.
Though often unattributed, country and rock and roll have deep roots in Black history. The banjo, a key instrument in traditional country music, can be traced back to West African stringed instruments like the lute. Otis Blackwell and Sister Rosetta Tharpe had a major influence on some of America's most beloved artists. And Chuck Berry, who combined rhythm and blues with country, became known as the father of rock and roll.
Rock and roll is Black music. It's just a fact. Of course, Run DMC was listening to rock and roll. That's why I'm the king of rock.
There is none higher. Sucker MCs should call me sire. To burn my kingdom, you must choose fire. I won't stop rocking till I retire.
He knew what the hell he was doing. He knew what he was listening to, but he just presented it in a different way. But Run DMC were rock stars.
Music is already moving up into replacing rock and roll at this point.
That's right. Not only that, but rap is rock and roll. You know why? Because we be rocking as we rolling, boy.
Like rock and roll, hip-hop is an amalgamation of different traditions and techniques, so it only makes sense that the two would find a synergy.
It was hard for people to accept hip-hop. Critics and media used to say it was a fad, it wasn't gonna last. And that collaboration between Aerosmith and Run DMC did a lot for opening the world's eyes up to the potential of hip-hop. I think by the time we get to Jay-Z and Linkin Park, Collision Course, which was a mashup of their biggest records, it wasn't that Jay-Z needed Linkin Park. It actually maybe lended more credibility to Linkin Park at that point. The tables had turned a bit, but what it really did was bring people together. You know what I'm saying? So it makes the tours bigger. It opens up the fan base. It was clear this was the driving force of youth culture in America and the world.
Today, artists are producing entire albums that defy categorization.
When you look at someone like a Rico Nasty, who makes music that sounds very punk influenced, same with Playboi Carti or Lil Uzi Vert, Travis Scott, they all consider themselves rock stars in a way, and they are all heavily influenced by all of these other genres in their rap. When you look at Playboi Carti's album, Whole Lotta Red, he's billed as a rapper, but that was not a rap album. He's not really rapping on it. There's a lot of punk influence, there's a lot of rock influence.
On Wikipedia alone, hip-hop appears to have dozens of microgenres, not to mention countless international scenes and fusions. There's more melodic rap, where artists are less lyrically verbose and rely heavily on autotune, like this track by Future.
Love is just a word, it don't matter to me. I got so written that matters to me.
Or harder trap music, which includes variation like drill. And within that is Chicago drill, Brooklyn drill, UK drill. And then there's Latin trap, funk, and tread. And even still, music labels and award shows tend to limit artists to a single category.
Tyler, the Creator, is a perfect example of this. His album Igor, which was not a hip hop album, honestly. And I think it was nominated in a hip hop category or in like an urban category.
And it was lauded as an amazing rap album. That album is not rap, right? There's so many different elements to it that people just don't know what to do with it. And they go, oh, he's black, put it as rap.
He was singing, it was very experimental.
Can we be friends? Are we still friends? I've got to know.
For an album with very little rapping, Tyler, the Creator, won a Grammy for Best Rap Album, but he wasn't exactly thrilled.
It sucks that whenever we, and I mean guys that look like me, do anything that's genre bending or that's anything, they always put it in a rap or urban category, which is, and I don't like that urban word. It's just a politically correct way to say the N-word to me.
When Tyler wants to make a rap album, you know it's a rap album. You know what I'm saying? When he wants to make Igor, you know it's in the pop lane or alternative or however you want to classify it. I think as an artist, he should be able to classify himself.
It doesn't make sense to me that we're calling what Lil Uzi Vert does the same genre as Public Enemy, you know? You look at rock and roll and people aren't putting Green Day next to Led Zeppelin. Hip hop is the only one where everything has to be under this one same umbrella, and that's where I think much of the confusion comes from. Down south, they've created whole new genres.
From me growing up as a kid, you would have different samples coming from all type of different sounds or different, beats used to create the sound of hip hop. A lot of times people, when they want to hear a Frida song, they expect strictly bounce. But I have experimented, with hip hop, with pop, with a little gospel.
Big Frida is an artist from New Orleans who's often referred to as the Queen of Bounce, or as she likes to say,
Big Frida, the Queen Diva.
Bounce music is considered a variation of hip hop, but it has its own distinct sound and culture.
I describe bounce music as up-tempo, heavy bass call and respond type music. It has a lot to deal with shaking of the ass and moving of the body parts. It's full of energy, it's full of life, it's repetitive, and it differs from, all other music in hip hop because the formulas that we use to make the beat.
Like Frida's classic hit, Gin in My System.
Do it for you. Shake, 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 shake it for you. Shake it for you. Work, 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 work it for you. Work it for you. Clap it for you. Clap it for you.
The key elements, the trigger man, the cheeky black claps, the brown beat, all of the essentials that you need to even start to make a bounce beat from scratch.
Artists labeled as hip-hop or rap have been blending sounds and blurring genres for decades. And today, it's even harder to categorize them due to new technology and social media.
There are so many different genres of music and you can access them through your phone. There's less need for gatekeepers now because someone can blow up and be the biggest artist in the world with no record deal, without ever winning any awards at an award show. And they're still huge online. They still have huge fan bases.
But this departure from being defined by a single genre is also the general evolution of most artists.
I make hip hop music primarily, but I make all types of music though. House music, I've made rock music, soul music. Hip hop was not the first music that I started listening to and I really fell in love with. And it was not the last.
You shouldn't be limited by these boxes. Genre is really just a way to market music to the consumer.
So if hip hop is diverging and continues to experiment with different sounds, when does it stop being hip hop altogether?
if you're from a certain generation, as hip hop evolves, you may start to feel like it loses the essence that it had when you were a kid.
There's this balance, right, of respecting what hip hop used to be while acknowledging that it's not there anymore. I don't want to hear Sugar Hill Gang, but I respect that Big Daddy Kane informed Jay-Z, and Jay-Z is my favorite MC. So it's like, you know, you just respect the tree as much as you respect the branch, you know, that comes from it.
But I think if you're hip hop, you know hip hop when you hear it. It's an attitude. It's a, like, it might be harder for corporate America to define it, or for the uninitiated or the untrained ear. But you could hear someone be like, nah, that's some hip hop.
So I think 10 years from now, hip hop is going to sound wildly different than it does now. I would like to think that it will sound very different and be very experimental, but I think that there has to be a balance between experimenting with new sounds and making sure that we protect the ethos and the essence of what it is.
People are still experimenting and changing the sound, and what could they do different to make their music different from back in the day?
I think the culture's changing, I think the music is changing, and I think the institutions have to change with it, and the institutions aren't changing quick enough.